Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues. We are great to see you at your computers or mobile devices. We're happy that you have joined our Cobalt regular annual virtual breakfast meeting. What a time, such an unusual time when we are meeting not in our grand breakfast halls, but we are having on our own mugs of coffee and croissants by our working table and meeting digitally. Now I'm passing the floor to our dear friend and colleague Irmantas Norkus in Vilnius, and he will be followed by Dace Silva-Thompson in Riga, and then Martin Simovart from Tallinn will greet you. The floor is yours, Irmantas.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I had a terrible echo in my room. I don't know, as usual nowadays we need to check some technical things prior, but I hope you hear me well and no echo at your part. So friends, welcome to our first virtual breakfast. We thought we need to keep up with our tradition and meet our colleagues and friends at IBA. This time not physically but virtually, and what to do? We need to adapt to the situation and continue working and developing relationships and making friendships. So I'm very happy that we have so many or quite a few participants this morning to our virtual breakfast. And today we are serving those intergalactic blue croissants that you see on your screen, and with pumpkin spice coffee. And I hope you will have fun this 30-40 minutes with us. And we are looking forward perhaps to meet you sometime soon face-to-face, be it Miami, Paris, or any other jurisdictions. So, but today let me start with describing how we are doing or what we are facing. And you see the sun is shining just in Vilnius. I'm broadcasting from Vilnius, and I will cover a bit of macro situation in three Baltic states, and then Martin will continue with overview of legal markets in our Baltic countries, and Dace will cover it up with explaining how we responded to this COVID pandemic challenges. So Baltic countries, you may know that both are small economies, and we are a 6 million population in total. So we are a diverse and agile economy. So no surprise that we did not have a major impact or hit on our wealth during those pandemic days. And it is forecast by BRD and IMF that GDP of Lithuania will shrink only by 1.5% this year. And Latvia will be slightly more, 4 to 5, Estonia 4. So it's really compared to European average or those records in UK, Italy, Spain, Portugal. Baltic countries are doing very well. Even if to take this Nordic region, our economies suffered least. And next year we expect a rebound, and rebound by some 3 to 5% in GDP. That should mean that we are supposed to have more work than this year. Our state debt levels in Baltic countries are still very low, and they are lower and below 50% of GDP, which compared to European average of 80% or of both record debtors like Greece and Italy is still very small level of debt, meaning that we have a room for really taking cheap money, borrowing cheap money and deploying it in our economies and investing. And exactly, this is exactly what our governments are thinking. And that should really increase state spending and build our economy further. Our exports to our main business markets have not decreased, and they remain at the same level. But our share of net exports, share of free Baltic countries in the exports to EU increased, meaning that free Baltic countries, we took this opportunity, so to say, or chance, and increased their exports to EU. That helps our producers really to survive and do quite well. So it looks like Baltics are the bubble, and we are not really see any major stress on the streets, and governments are doing quite a good job in supporting economy. And we saw a wide range of state aid measures really to keep up business going, and that resulted in really low decrease in GDP and economies not being shut down or experiencing a big stress. And the rise of deposits by households is a record in the EU, deposits in Baltic states. So that shows that our businesses and households, we are accumulating cash and keeping in deposits. So overall, the outlook is really positive, and we're happy to be part of small but adaptive economies, and that helps our business. Well, Martin, I'm passing the word to you. So how legal market in Baltic countries is doing?
Thank you, Martas, and hello to everyone from Tallinn too. So it's really unfortunate we are not able to meet you under the Florida sun, but we need to be in this cyberspace instead. But yeah, it is strange time we're experiencing right now. But okay, I'll take you through briefly the legal market, how we have been actually doing through this COVID crisis in the Baltics. I guess for all of us, when it all started, it was kind of a shock in March, in the beginning of March. The transactional M&A work almost stopped overnight. There were ongoing deals were abandoned or put on hold, but almost nothing happened in M&A for 2 months. At the same time, of course, the other sectors were kind of compensating for it. The COVID-related work, of course, was starting and growing, and at the same time also in M&A and corporate guys were doing restructuring work, both just the corporate restructuring, but as well as the insolvency-related restructuring. So overall, I would say the revenue and the performance in the Baltics and in our firm during this first months of COVID and lockdown actually didn't decrease, but we were going kind of sideways. So there was not a drastic increase either, but we were able to maintain the level we were kind of a year before. However, now since August, there has been kind of a really major boost at the market, and especially in the transactional activity as such. And at least as seen from our perspective, it is extremely good, and we're probably busier than ever before. And the transactions we are seeing, the scale and the volume and the number is incredible. So we can certainly say that now we are able to compensate for going this sideways for the first months, and probably we are going for the best year ever in our markets. And I would say that only not for us, but also for the competitors too. So I hope the same goes for you, because at least what I've been talking with the peers in other countries, it looks like as the transactional activity is really high, and the reasons behind it might be, of course, that there is kind of still quite a bit of cash around, and the investors need to invest, and still looks like that after the first wave of crisis, there is also increasing interest in getting, disposing and rid of what's been accumulated. So I really hope that we take most out of this crisis, and when it's finally over, we'll be able to regroup again and have a proper celebration. And I would really maybe like to pass it on now to Tase, who give us a brief insight on how we've been able to achieve that while working remotely. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. Thank you. And greetings to all the friends who have managed to join our session. I will supplement this overview, which was provided by Virmantas and Martin, with few comments related to the response of the Baltic law firms to this new COVID era environment, which we are all facing. And I have to say that overall, we have been surprisingly well prepared for those challenges, both technology-wise and in terms of financial situation. The largest commercial law firms in the Baltics already have had in place various tools and systems for smooth processing of the work, even under those new circumstances. We have in place document management systems, CRM systems, electronic filings, signings, invoicing systems, and also team communication tools. So switching to this new remote work environment really has been smooth and successful for us. Also financially, Baltic law firms are really stable. There is no external financing. And to our probably surprise, we have seen that during the COVID times, the payment discipline of our clients has really not been very adversely affected. All of this combined with continued workload really has made Baltic law firms doing really well. We have not seen any layoffs. We have not seen any Baltic law firms turning for some state support measures of any kind. So it's more or less financially business as usual. And as Martin already mentioned, what we expect is that probably during 2020, we will see modest to high turnover growth for all the largest firms at least. And we will see a quite significant growth of profit also, which to a large extent is driven by decreased costs on the side of traveling, marketing, etc. So obviously, the largest challenge for the Baltic law firms has been maintaining spirit of the firms, teams, and individuals. And how we have addressed this situation is really by increased, intensified mutual communication between the countries, between the practice groups and various teams. Also, we have revisited our mentoring programs, making sure that each of our juniors is well and properly attended by our senior people. And fortunately, in the Baltics, we have not seen any strict lockdown measures, and we have been able also to maintain a person-to-person communication of the law firms. Overall, we remain cautiously optimistic, and we believe that spring of 2021 will come with an increased workload. We also certainly hope that the COVID vaccine will reopen possibilities to travel, and we will have a possibility to see all of you once again in person. So those are notes from my side, and I'm back to Lauris in studio.
That's Martin and Virmantas. Thank you very much for the concise but all-inclusive, informative review on how the life of us has been in these turbulent, unusual times. And now, back in our studio, I'm happy to introduce to you a guest of our breakfast session, Mr. Janis Sartz, who is head of NATO Strategic Communications Center of Excellence, residing in Riga. Janis, thank you for joining us in the studio. And the main reason why we wanted to chat with you within this breakfast session is related to these unusual times. NATO Center of Excellence has a variety of areas where you are busy with, and we had noticed the center's activities already before, when our information systems had been attacked by malicious players, when information has been spread that does not correspond to the standards of reality and the like. But you could perhaps start with a brief introduction. What is the Center for Strategic Communication Excellence?
Well, first of all, good morning to everyone. Well, what we do, we're trying to understand what is happening in the modern information space, which to a large extent is digital, and how that reflects on the information war, and what we increasingly label as a cognitive warfare that is going on in the information space, waged mostly online. We look at how emerging technologies are affecting the information space, how that has an effect on the way society works, society interactions, and try to actually make recommendations for the government and for NATO. What are the best ways forward in this, I would argue, complex situation?
Yes, indeed, undeniably. And I'm absolutely sure that also our today's participants, virtual participants, may have some questions or perhaps certain comments, and you most definitely are welcome to ask your questions or share your brief comments, if any, using menti.com virtual site. You could see on your screens the code 1235 and 3 zeros, or you can scan the QR code with your devices. So inevitably, we are in the situation where we cannot live on, we cannot profess without using modern technology. What are these dangers that emanate from this new reality?
Well, there are quite a few dangers. First, of course, is a typical cyber crime, cyber security danger, where the more we are online, the more our interactions are online, the more there are ways some criminal actors can access information or money that we transfer back and forth. That's one. Second is the loss of privacy, which is, I think, a significant element, because basically the democratic societies have been built on the concept of privacy as a right, and people have basically given up. I think for most of those that watch around this session, you would find information very, very rich just online without hacking and etc. And that has many vectors of risks because of that. And then ultimately there is this transformation of information space risk, and that is the more we exist in a digital environment, the more we get encapsulated into the information bubble. So the bubble basically gives us the world as we wish it to be. So even for people that do pay attention not to be very one-side-minded, even for them the technology basically starts because they understand what you like, what's going to bring your attention to the platform. They're trying to bring you more and more, so we get encapsulated in a point of view, and that destroys the normal interaction within the society, the normal building a consensus.
Well, this is really paradoxical. You say that we ourselves are committing our data, we ourselves are opening us up, and in the same time, you point to this danger that this exposes us to being manipulated, also in terms of generating more comfort, feeding us with only that information that we want to hear, that we want to see. Where do you see the way out? Where should we go?
Well, I think clearly what we lack is the regulation on that space. For instance, most of the people that have smartphones, they have apps. That's the reason you have a smartphone, after all. And what do you do? What do you pay for your apps, or you get the ones that are for free? Most people get them for free. Well, what's for free? The cheese in the mousetrap is for free. What's the business model? The business model is sell your data, your GPS location, your contacts, your browsing history, etc., etc. And that, of course, gives somebody an ample understanding of you, your patterns. You can look from that, from the perspective of big data, where you can understand how humans interact, but you can look at it very individually. And if you think of individually, we recently had an experiment on the soldiers in the armed forces of Latvia, and we browsed the open source big data that's available on the soldiers during military exercise, and then tried to affect what they do during the military exercise. And the open source big data was enough to make us soldiers disobey orders, leave the positions that they have to defend during military exercise. So do something that is in every sense utterly counterproductive to their best interest. And that happens when you have a deep insight of an individual. So that's one way. The other way, of course, Facebooks, YouTubes all collect that information to keep you on that platform, because basically, you know, what's the business model? We're the product that is given to the advertisers. So the more we're on a platform, the more money can be made. And there are no rules. What is okay, what is not? What are the rules for privacy? What are the rules for data brokers whose business is to collect our own data and then resell, package it and resell it? So it's basically, we see this new reality of digital online, which has been, you know, much increased during the pandemic. There's basically no rules. And if there are rules, nobody's really seeing whether they are followed.
When we are addressing our dear friends and colleagues, lawyers, and you say regulation, this is something we immediately cheer up, because we say, well, this is an area for lawyers to work on. Are there any initiatives? How far we are with this concept of regulating this virtual reality?
And this is one of these, well, there are steps in particular within the European Union. There are some member states of the European Union that have taken some steps. But there is an endemic gap. And the endemic gap is the speed of governance, which is basically 20th century speed. It takes time to create consensus, to draft the law, put it into, to go through the agreements, and then put it into practice. The speed of technology, next year, the reality might be different. So there is always going to be the gap, and currently that gap of non-regulated space is growing. Especially true that is for the EU. Now, yes, EU is working on the issues on the data, the privacy, and etc., but it is going to take a while. And when it's going to be introduced, like GDPR, okay, it's better than nothing. But frankly speaking, you can do most of the bad things even with the GDPR being in place. Because it was created long time, technological sense time ago. US, we'll see the new administration, but they have been cautious. But I hope, because I think there's bigger danger. And that danger is that there's a deep societal disruption that will happen. Inability to have a coherent agreement on basic things. And I think right now within pandemic, we start to feel that. And in extreme cases like US, you feel it like also in the political circles. So it's a damaging thing.
Right. Well, while you mention US, there's a first question popping up asking about US presidential election. And did the election or pre-election process uncovered something unexpected in terms of cybersecurity perspective? How do you see it?
Well, unlike in 2016, I would say there was no foreign interference seen. but not for the lack of trying by certain actors. I think this time around, the US administration pieces were much more better prepared. So the word has it, there have been preemptive cyber attacks from the US on specific actors to prevent their action, which has, in my view, succeeded. There was no, at the later stage, interventions by neither Russia nor China nor Iran, who were trying to do something. But I would argue, we just recently finished an experimentation on the risks and vulnerabilities. There's a whole ecosystem where you can buy manipulation of platforms. So buy through the robotic accounts, like, shares, views, custom-made comments in the online environment. And we tend to buy these services and test how much of that is delivered. And unfortunately, we just tested during the US presidential elections, and the tests came back that about 70% of that, what we bought, went through. So if somebody wanted to manipulate, companies typically wouldn't see it. And the cost of manipulation, about 50,000 effects, would cost you about 300 euros. So it's really cheap. Wow. And you can have like millions for a couple of thousand. And that can sway a bit of this digital optic, what is happening.
Right. I was particularly surprised that initially, when I would look at the new cyber reality, I would assume that this is a dangerous place, in particular for my kids, for a younger generation. But more I operate with this, more I'm immersed by it, more I realize that it is dangerous also for a rather skillful players, including our dear colleagues. So there's another question popping up, which effectively is a question I was thinking all the time, and I wanted you, Janis, to answer it. What are your essential recommendations to survive in the new cyber reality?
Well, I think there are different levels of recommendations. One is, for general hygiene that everybody has to have, but then the people that would see that they might become a more valuable targets within this online space, they have a next level that has to be performed. So first, I think it's typical cyber hygiene things like watch where you're going, keep up your program updates, etc., etc. I'm sure everybody is doing that all the time. Second, I would be very careful for the apps that are for free.
Basically all the social networks, isn't that?
Yeah, well, you have to be on the social networks, and also it's a good way to market your services, certainly. But I would be very careful. For instance, on my smartphone, I enter these social media only through the net, never through the app. Just to make their life more difficult. There are other elements, like where you talk. I would always pick the Signal as the most secure kind of way of communicating with your colleagues. The third thing is understand that we all have cognitive biases. When I go into the online environment, I make a point of connecting to people that have very different point of view than I do, because that, in my understanding, brings me a better understanding of where the kind of, for instance, Latvian or European information environment is. Because if you sit in your own environment, you can have the mistake that Europe had in 2016, believing that Hillary is going to win that like by a landslide.
Yes.
If you're not in a given, you've not connected to other part, you have that misjudgment. And misjudgments might be really dangerous. The last piece is, of course, the kind of data on privacy data that you leave around. I would always try to check what you put in, the kind of data options when you want to read an article or get somewhere. But by and large, I think we should function with the assumption that we have no privacy, especially if you go to China. Well, then all of that is gone. But even in Europe, inadvertently sometimes, and that's kind of, you have to also alter the way you act, because for somebody you have no privacy, you have all your life is open for somebody. And that has to be a thought to everyone at this moment. I hope it will change, but at this moment.
So should we adapt to this new reality in which we basically are an online TV show participants?
Well, of course, for most of the time, the one that looks at our lives is AI. So you don't have a human because they probably are, you're just one of those many data points from whom the bigger extrapolations are being made. But if necessary, you can have a human on the other side. That's where you kind of differentiate the normal kind of inhabitant of a digital environment and the one that has a higher value. And of course, it might be from a state perspective, you have higher value, or you might have from a business perspective, higher value. That's your judgment to make where you stand. But basically, the assumption has to be there's no privacy and everything you've done is known.
Right. Well, this is an unenviable reality. Another new element in my vocabulary is a term that you uttered a few moments ago when we discussed initially, infodemic. Can you elaborate?
Well, yes, right now I think we've seen during the pandemic that we have a combination of the crisis, anxiousness within the society, and the very digital information world. And that in all combination has created a new phenomenon called infodemic. There's so much fake, untrue being circulated that has hampered the ability of the societies to respond properly to the virus. And different groups, even the statesmen, have been using wrong facts or not using facts for their statements. And that has, I think, created this very clear point that this bad information environment that has been created by and large by the digital norms, or the ability to spread has been created by the digital current realities, can create a situation where you actually deepen the crisis, rather use information to get out of a crisis. And right now, I predict that the vaccine and anti-vaccine disinformation will be the biggest disinformation fight we've seen in like decades. And if we're not successful, vaccine will not deliver what it is supposed to deliver. And so the hope for getting back to normal might be exaggerated, because if large segments of people decide to believe in this non-scientific statements by a number of factors for various reasons, there will be large amounts of people that will not get a vaccine. That means that the disease is going to continue to spread. So I think that's a new phenomenon. But it's not only related to the pandemic, it just exacerbated by the pandemic. But that's a new reality, and that has to be taken into consideration.
Well, thank you. And it seems that our breakfast session is coming to an end. Perhaps you could suggest your sort of wishes that you would expect us. You are a military man. You work with the NATO, that is an alliance that keeps our continent safe. Any advice?
Well, one thing I would really plea for, and that's to work, everybody has to work for rules and norms. That is the thing that starts to disappear as we see it. And basically, we see it coming from this information and digital space, and then transforming into other live elements of life. And we've seen in some bigger countries that really takes more vivid forms. So we have to go back and work for the norms. And to me, what is the key? The technological progress has not stopped. AI is going to deliver more. 5G Internet of Things is going to deliver more, and there'll be more ways to exploit that in a better way. We have to start producing rules and norms and regulation before the technology enters, rather than catching up all the time. So that's my plea also to the people existing within the law. They're thinking about that all the time. Let's turn that dynamic around. Instead of catching the reality, let's get ahead of it, because that's the only way we can solve it.
Great. Thank you, Janis Sartz, Head of Center for Strategic Communication of Excellence of NATO. And thank you all the participants of this breakfast session. I do hope that for a variety of reasons, vaccines or any other achievements in scientific and medical worlds, we will be able to complete this session or live of only virtual meetings, and we will be able to get together, and hopefully as early as 2021 IBA session, we will meet you again in person in safe circumstance. Thank you very much, everyone, for participating. I hope you all had good coffee and thoughtful considerations about what we were discussing, and hope to see you and meet you again soon. Bye-bye.